Welcome to the Living a Nordic Life podcast, where we explore a simpler, cosier and more intentional life the Nordic way. I'm Fiona McKenna, your Nordic living guide and founder of Living a Nordic Life, where I share all things Nordic living and show you that a Nordic life is the way to bring intentional calm and healthy habits into your own life, wherever you are in the world. Are you looking for ways to bring simplicity, coziness and calm into your life? Well, let me show you how. Visit the Living a Nordic Life website to explore how I can help you on your journey to simple, healthy and happy calm, the Nordic way. You can subscribe to the podcast right here. And if you want regular inspirational emails sent with love from Norway and straight to your inbox, don't forget to subscribe to the Living a Nordic Life newsletters. And so now let's dive into our episode. Hello and welcome to this episode, How to Eat a Nordic Diet. Well, actually, it's more than a Nordic diet. It is how to eat like you're Nordic. So there's more to eating like you're Nordic than just food. It's the way we eat as well. And I've already written a blog post about this, which you might have read, but I felt that it was something that also warranted a podcast episode because it's something I feel really passionate about and something that I've been doing myself for a very long time, and it's easy to implement. But what started it off was that a few years ago I read an article in somewhere like The Guardian or BBC. It was somewhere terribly British that had me worried and wondering. And that feeling stuck with me actually for several years since I read that. It was about the health benefits of eating a Nordic diet, or eating Nordic food, and how we should be at least giving it a go. But the thing that concerned me the most was that the writer had said it was expensive and impractical. Now, I don't know where they lived. I don't remember. I'd have to look that up. But if they were British, then they, of course, they would have been living in Britain, no doubt, and it wouldn't really have been expensive and impractical. But I found it so worrying because the basis of a Nordic diet, and I use the word loosely because we're looking at the way we eat as opposed to a diet regimen. The basis of a Nordic diet is to eat seasonally and with as few additives as possible, which is what most of my recipes are like. Very simple. And I'm going to show you how to do this in the rest of the article. But if we make a conscious effort, it is achievable. And it can be wonderful for our own health and for the good of the planet. And certainly not expensive, not impractical, and not difficult. Most of it you'll see is common sense. Because we live in Norway, my family and I eat a Nordic diet every day. Don't have to here, but we do. And it's something that we've been doing for a long time, even before we moved to Norway. Even when we were living in England, we were still eating this kind of diet. But once we moved here and embraced the Nordic life, which took a few years, it was even easier to be absorbed into that way of eating. So I want to share my own tips with you and give you a glimpse into how we approach it from a manageable, normal family, and you can do the same. I'm not going to go through every single part of eating a Nordic diet. You could do a bit of research yourself if you want to do a deep dive. But I do have some recipe suggestions for you, which I'm going to put in the bottom of the comments, the write-up here. And if you really want even more recipes, there's a lot on my blog already, something like 100 recipes on there, all traditional Nordic recipes. But if you want even more than that and you want inspiration every month, then go and have a look at my Living a Nordic Life VIP membership. It's nothing too involved, but it's just a lot more articles every month, and I think you'll love it. So let me offer you some easy and achievable ways of eating like you're Nordic that you can start doing right now, today, wherever you are in the world. You don't have to be living here in Scandinavia. The first one is keep breakfast simple. This is where we start. And breakfast in Scandinavia is usually very simple. It can be a knäckebröd, that's a crisp bread, with a healthy topping, a slice of bread, wholemeal bread usually, or some yoghurt. It's generally something that's quick, easy, generally cold, and healthy. And that takes longer to digest than sweet processed foods. Now, I know it's easy to grab a box of cereal, and especially those sugary cereals with things like little bits of dried marshmallow, or I don't know what they're called, like Lucky Charms or something like that. We don't really get them here. But that kind of thing is loaded with sugar. And it's also got quite a bit of salt in, and not necessarily as much fibre as you really want. And your blood sugar level goes up and you feel great for quite a short time, and then suddenly it plummets down and you feel like you need something, or you feel a bit low. You really want it to stay level. Most things like Knekkebrød are whole grain, and they contain seeds and fibre, which the body takes a few hours to digest. And so that keeps us feeling fuller for longer. Now, if you include some protein in the form of maybe some cheese, meat, fish, eggs, or even some vegetable protein of some description, and a little bit of fat in that, and you've got the making for a really good healthy breakfast. Less red meat. And people in the Nordic countries really do like red meat a lot. But it can be quite prohibitive because it's pricey. It's really pricey. And it's not always the best quality, I'm going to say that, unless you go to the butcher. If you go to the supermarket, everything is vacuum packed, pretty much. And they have, some of them have the occasional kind of butcher's stand, butcher's desk. But usually it's vacuum packed and you can't really look at it, and it's not necessarily that wonderful. If you go to a butcher, an old-fashioned butcher, which we do, but it's a bit of a drive, I have to say, then you get to choose your meat and everything's lovely. But because it's so expensive, we eat less of it and less often. Healthier meat like chicken, game, and pork, yes, pork fat has found to be on the healthy list, is chosen. And pork, especially in my part of Norway, in the southeast, because it's a bit of a thing here. And most of it tends to be fairly fatty pork as well. It's things like rib, which is probably a good 40% fat and a lot of skin. But if you cook it in a certain way, then that melts away most of it, but it makes it very delicious. But you don't need to eat that every day. In my own cooking, I like to hide vegetables and mushrooms in meat dishes where possible. And I usually do that in minced meat dishes. So things like meatballs, cottage pie, moussaka. It's kind of get a little bit off-piste there, don't you, with the recipe, because you wouldn't normally put a lot of vegetables in it. But what I do is I take things like onion, carrot, mushrooms, always mushrooms. You don't taste them, but they add a meatiness to a dish. And also they are very good for you. They're really good for your brain. But I add those to the dish by putting them in a food processor and chopping them up until they're really fine, the same consistency as the mince. Then I saute them, add them to the mince, and a good 50% vegetables, 50% meat. Now, here in Norway, there's become a little bit of a thing where the meat producers have started to make these packages of mince that are 50% vegetables. And they're doing the same thing, really. They're chopping it up and mixing it in with the mince so that you don't have to do it yourself. Now, that's great if you can't be bothered to do it yourself, or you don't have time, or you don't know what to do, you don't have a food processor. But if you've got a food processor, just take a couple of minutes. You literally just chuck everything in. Waz it up until it's in tiny little pieces, mix it in with your mince. And once they're finely chopped and cooked with the meat, it's almost impossible to distinguish the two. My eldest refuses to eat mushrooms, but if I do this, he will eat, I don't know, 200 grams of mushrooms quite easily without even noticing that they're there in the meat. But you could also try substituting a white meat or some vegetables for a red meat dish once a week, then maybe twice a week, and so on. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you are a dedicated carnivore that you remove meat completely, but we don't need to eat red meat for every single meal. Now, if you've got some kind of medical condition where you do have to eat it, then that's a different matter. But you still should be adding an awful lot more vegetables. I, for one, I have an autoimmune disease, which means I have a bit of a problem absorbing vitamin B12 and iron. And those two things are most readily available in red meat and offal particularly. So I do have to eat it almost every day. But I do have a lot of vegetables as well. It's not just red meat. That takes me on to the next point, more fish and shellfish. And it's no secret that the Nordic countries love their fish. And if you're put off by whole fish, which I know a lot of people are, it's those tiny bones, isn't it? Especially if you have a smaller fish like a trout. If you have something big like a salmon and you cook it whole, that might be something you can get hold of. We can get hold of those quite easily here in the freezer compartment, and they're cheapish as well. But if you have something big, it's easier to bone it. But if you have a small fish, I know that the little bones put people off and they don't like to get them in their mouths. But you can buy filleted fish, or maybe enjoy some prepared fish products that are easy to get. But do try to go for simple and unprocessed things like natural tuna in a tin, frozen prawns, fillets of salmon, or things like tinned sardines. But go for tinned sardines that are in oil. And if we're going down, the kind of finer route here, maybe olive oil. If you can get them in olive oil rather than sunflower oil, which is processed quite a lot, I'm sorry to say. But that's pretty much all that is in there. But if you want more flavour, you could go for something like some smoked salmon. Again, check the packet. Or other smoked fish. Gives you an awful lot more flavour, doesn't it, smoking? It's lovely. But do be aware that some smoked fish has a dye in it, like smoked haddock. So you need to look for a naturally smoked product. They add some kind of yellow dye. Some of it is natural dye, like turmeric, to give it that kind of bright yellow colour. But if it's a really lurid yellow that makes your eyes hurt, then you know that it's got something added to it that you don't want. So just have a look at the ingredients. You have to get into the habit of that. And once you get used to it, it's easy. The fewer ingredients, the better it's going to be. More fermented food. Now, you might be surprised how many fermented foods you're already eating, because I'm pretty sure if you go and look in your fridge, you've got at least one. Dairy products like kefir, cultured buttermilk, sour cream, and yoghurt are all fermented. They might not be fermented for a very long time. They might only be fermented for a few hours or a day, but they are still fermented. Sauerkraut and kimchi are two obvious vegetable choices which are familiar to most people, and they're fermented. And you can get all sorts of varieties, so don't taste just one. I mean, kimchi can be a bit of a shock if you're not used to it, I have to say. I mean, it is very spicy. And some of the more matured kimchi does have an interesting, maybe slightly acquired taste to it. But sauerkraut can be a lot milder. Make sure it is a fermented sauerkraut. But it can be a lot milder. And you can actually make sauerkraut very, very easily yourself. I think that's another blog post I need to do, actually, how to make your own sauerkraut. It's fantastic. It is so easy to make. It is just cabbage that's chopped or sliced and salt water, and then you just leave it for a few days to ferment. You can add spices to it. And I experiment with lots of different things. I've tried adding apple and some onion to it to give it a little bit of a different flavour. You don't really notice the apple, I have to say. It gives it a slightly milder, more sweet flavour. But I've also added spices. A very traditional German sauerkraut has caraway seeds in it. And you can add all kinds of things to it. You can experiment. You don't have to stick to the recipe. Once you've mastered it, it's a lot of fun and very rewarding. But if you need a little bit of convincing, I do have a couple of recipes for things like sur milk fromage, which is a dessert, a set dessert that is made with a fermented milk product, or you can make your own yogurt. Now go on my blog and have a look for that because it is so easy. It is an overnight job and you don't really do anything. There's a little bit of stirring, which is quite nice. It's mindful and intentional. It slows you down. It helps you think about what you're making to eat. And you produce a couple of pints of yogurt just by letting it ferment overnight. And it's really delicious. It's much nicer than anything you are going to buy. And you can choose your milk as well, and you can have something really delicious. You only need 2 ingredients and some time. But do try and get some fermented foods into your diet because it's really good for your gut. It helps feed those healthy, friendly gut bacteria that we all have that make us feel good. These are not ones that are going to make you feel unwell. These are good ones. We want them. My next point is eat seasonally. And this might seem really silly or something that perhaps you find impossible. How can I do that? But eating seasonally is literally just common sense. Ask yourself when you go to choose fresh fruit and vegetables, because this is what we're talking about here. Would that thing be growing naturally where I live now or near where I live now? Or is it something that can be stored well, such as cabbages, they store nicely, potatoes, apples, onions, the kind of thing I'm talking about. Kiwis, actually, surprisingly enough, they're best in March, even though they're harvested at the end of the summer the previous year. They're kept and they become sweeter and softer. They're lovely. But would it be something that you would be able to grow now where you are? And if the answer is no, then it's not seasonal. You can always look for guides as to what is seasonal where you are, and some things are grown under cover. But for example, here in Norway in January, we are not going to get strawberries. I mean, they might grow them somewhere. There might be somebody somewhere who's growing them, probably in a basement with a light. I don't know. But growing them outside, it's not going to happen. The ground is frozen. So I don't buy them, even though they are available in the shops. There's a few punnets at an eye-popping price. I won't even tell you how much they are. But they come from somewhere like Mexico or, I don't know. I want to say South Africa, but I think that's too far. But they are not seasonal, so I don't buy them. But things like apples, which do keep. Oranges are seasonal, they come a little bit of a distance, but try to avoid things that have to travel several thousand miles to you. They're not going to be at their best. You could also shop locally. Farm shops and whole food shops usually stock products that have a short distance to travel. That is their selling point. They're selling something that's local. And by going to these local shops, you're also supporting your regional economy. For example, I go to a local farm, I pass it quite frequently, that grows potatoes and carrots. And at this time of year, they've already dug up the potatoes several months ago, and they've had them in storage in the barn in the cold, not frozen, but in the cold, and they are amazing. They are so much better than the potatoes in the shops, which are a little bit rubbery. I don't know what they do with them to get them rubbery, but they seem to be able to do that, even though they're Norwegian ones. But the farm shop potatoes are fantastic, and I can only buy them through the winter. And the spring, when it gets to warmer weather, above about 16 degrees, the lady who runs the farm doesn't sell them because she says it's too hot and they don't do very well. Presumably they get eyes and shoots and what have you, inside the bags. So she stops selling them when the temperature gets warm. We never know when that's going to be. I mean, it might be May, it might be June, who knows, I just have to keep calling in to see if she's got any. But these potatoes that she sells are amazing. They're really firm. They've got an awful lot of flavour. They've just come out of the ground, almost a stone's throw from where you're standing. And they've got soil on them. And we're supporting the farm as well. If we go to these places and keep buying these things from these local shops, they can stay open. And then our choice is better. My next point is eat sweets and candy only at the weekend. We do this here. Admittedly, there are probably people who have it on other times of the week, but generally speaking, it's a Saturday. And it's a Swedish habit of enjoying candy on a Saturday. But it's something that's been adopted here in Norway as well, and it is really popular. People look forward to it as a weekend treat of sweets, candy, or chocolate, and they save it for that day. And it doesn't make us feel penalised, actually. You'd think it would, wouldn't you? You'd think it would be this taking something away. But actually it doesn't. It gives you this really nice, cosy feeling of treating yourself at the end of the week. And then it's easier to say no to unhealthy habits through the week. So you're setting yourself up with a treat. is a positive thing. You're saying yes to something rather than saying no. You are saying no, but it feels like a yes because it's yes, I can have those sweets on a Saturday. I'm going to save them. Maybe because you're not eating them through the week, you can buy something that's better quality, or a chocolate, a box of chocolates from somewhere that you don't very often go to because they're handmade. It's a bit more expensive. Got fewer ingredients, artisan shop, we're kind of pulling all these things together, aren't we? Forage for your own wild food. Now, I could talk about this all day. I love foraging. It's one of my great passions. I really love wild food as well. And yes, I admit I can be a little bit obsessive about it, especially when it's mushroom season. Oh my goodness, I will be out every day. You'd be surprised how quickly they grow as well in the forest. You go and pick mushrooms one day and then you go the next day and it's like you haven't touched anything. I do not decimate it, I have to say. You have to be very careful, especially with certain species. You want to leave something behind. But I absolutely love mushroom foraging. And I'm sure Andre hates mushroom season because I can spot a mushroom. When we're in the car doing 60 miles an hour, I can spot a mushroom at the side of the road. And I shout, "Stop, mushroom!" And he has to stop the car. He doesn't always, but he usually does because he likes obliging me. Otherwise I get upset. But he stops the car and I rush out and I pick this mushroom, and it's usually something like a porcini, but they grow at the side of the road here. Clean roads, I might add. I don't do it on the motorway or any kind of busy highway. These are country roads, But yes, I am a little bit obsessive about it, but you don't need to start living in the forest or building campfires in your garden and trapping things to do some foraging to collect wild food. It's easier and it's much gentler than that. Get a little bit knowledgeable about the edible food that grows in your own region. This is going to be a little bit of research and some learning. Maybe you already know. Who knows? And you just need to be encouraged to get out there again. But you could join a local foraging group or a club, or you could actually do something online as well. There are identifiers for things like mushrooms and greenery. But you'll be surprised how much grows in your back garden and in your local area. Make sure you're picking from somewhere where they don't spray. I know that some parts of the world they do that. We don't have that here. So we can pick anywhere as long as it's clean. But I know that there are parts of the world where they do that. So try and get out into nature more to pick things, or in your own garden where you know it's safe. You then get to know what nature has to offer. And it can be really simple things like dandelions or some flowers. Dandelion flowers are lovely, actually. They're beautiful on salads. They look nice, don't they? Who doesn't want to cook with flowers? I mean, put them on some cakes. Things like pansies. I think in other parts of the world they might be called violets, but we call them pansies. They're edible. Every part of a pansy is edible. Nasturtiums you can grow yourself, and that feels a little bit like foraging, doesn't it? But there are lots of green things that come up, like nettles and fiddlehead ferns, and things that you can go and pick yourself. But once you get confident about what you can eat in the wild, you'll find it immensely rewarding, and it puts you in touch with nature more. Friluftsliv. Nordic outdoor life, just like your Nordic. We do a lot of foraging here. Everybody does it. Well, it seems like everybody does it. Certainly in mushroom season, everybody's out. But we pick a lot of things, and it's really good for you. Choose less processed food. Now, if it's ready-made and it's in a packet, there's a really good chance that it's a processed food. So look for natural foods and please read the packets. The fewer ingredients, the better, generally speaking. Fresh fruit and vegetables are really beautiful things with bright colours and appealing smells that should take centre stage in any meal or snack. It might mean eating a little less of something, but your body will thank you for it. Try and eat the rainbow a little bit when you go and buy things. What's colourful? Eat all the colours. Then you're getting a lot of different nutrients. And try and avoid beige if you can. Beige food is never good, is it? Don't be scared of a little bit of fat. Now, by fat, I'm talking about natural, unprocessed fats like butter, pork fat, and full-fat dairy products. The Nordic diet includes fats, but those of the unprocessed type, like butter and sour cream. Sour cream, okay, is fermented, but not really heavily processed fats like that spray-on oil, or various processed margarines. Oils and spreads are used, we're not living in a cabin in the woods here, but everyone favours fats of the unprocessed types. And we're not afraid of including it in our daily cooking. We quite happily do that. The weather helps a little bit in the winter when it's cold, but we don't need to eat a huge amount of fat in the summer and every other time, but we do have it. And when we choose it, we choose the healthy stuff. Eat dinner early. Life through the week in the Nordic countries starts early. And so by the time we get to late afternoon and early evening, everybody is really hungry. The working day finishes earlier than many nations. It's usually about 4 o'clock. And an evening meal is generally served at about 5 or 5:30. But this gives our bodies time to digest, and it also gives us that much needed fast overnight that has been proven to be beneficial. That period of time when you're not eating. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, have a look at the 5-2 diet, because that is a fasting diet. I'm not suggesting you should go on it if you don't want to, but it might just give you some ideas of how and why. 5-2 diet it's called. And it's all about giving your body a break. That's why we call it breakfast, breaking the fast. Eat more whole grains, nuts and seeds. Now, if you come to Scandinavia and you go to a supermarket, you will inevitably walk past the knäckebröd aisle. It's with the bread as well as a lot of wholemeal bread. And you'll notice this huge range of knäckebröd that is packed full of grains and seeds. Some of it, I have to admit, is enough to make your teeth break. It works your jaws. But it's almost all wholemeal or rye as well. And some of it is sourdough rye. Very thin, some of it's a little bit thicker, but it's all got whole grains, nuts and seeds in it usually. And they're things that are produced in a factory, admittedly, albeit small factories. But Scandinavians demand that things are kept simple in foods. And those that contain huge amounts of additives are not popular. So producers have to keep it healthy, and they have to include whole grains, seeds and fibre. So if you're able to get hold of some Nordic branded crisp breads, knäckebröd, then they make a really nice snack. Or you can make your own, and you'll find a recipe on my blog. But take some time to include more whole grains, nuts and seeds in your diet. And by choosing flavours that are wholemeal, eat a handful of natural nuts as a snack, for example, or use ground up nuts in recipes. They make really great thickeners. But try and include a lot more nuts and seeds and wholemeal stuff if you possibly can, because that is how we eat. And again, it keeps you feeling fuller for longer. And my final point is make the kitchen your friend. You're not going to be able to do this if you really don't want to go in the kitchen. There's no getting away from it. If you're going to eat more Nordically, you'll have to do some cooking yourself. I know that you can do it. It doesn't need to be complicated. And if you've never been much of a cook, it can be daunting. But as a cordon bleu chef, let me assure you that the simplest dishes with the least ingredients are always the best. They are the ones that have stood the test of time. You don't need to be Gordon Ramsay and have dishes that contain 40 exotic ingredients to create something delicious. A tip from me is to put aside a day or an afternoon and make some dishes that can be frozen in portion size. Batch cooking. It's a really useful thing to do. You'll be making your very own ready meals and you will know exactly what went into them. On the days when you don't want to do cooking, those are the things that are going to be really welcome. And the things that you can just pull out of the freezer and defrost, heat up, microwave, I don't know, however you heat up food. But it's a really good idea to do that. Maybe once a fortnight, just a few hours. Make something that's easy for you and put it away in the freezer. And then you're going to be having some nice, healthy food. So if you need some more encouragement, come on over to my blog and have a look. I've got lots and lots of recipes. Like I said, about 100 recipes and some ideas to live a simple, healthy Nordic life with a little bit of intention. And I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Living a Nordic Life newsletters so you can get an email when I release a new episode. It's a quick and easy way to keep up with all things Nordic living. Please visit livinganordiclife.com. You can listen to Living a Nordic Life on lots of podcast apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, and plenty of others. If you've enjoyed the Living a Nordic Life podcast, why not leave me a rating? So that's the end of Living a Nordic Life for today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.